would-be attacker. That will require more centralized planning than we have seen to date. Alarmism for the sake of sensational headlines is counterproductive. But the plain fact is that we have become exquisitely vulnerable to virtually any group or faction with an axe to grind. The spread of weapons of mass destruction to future Saddam Husseins is among the most important security problems we face. The military battles of the future are unlikely to be large-scale conventional ground warfare, as we saw in the Persian Gulf. U.S. adversaries are now less likely to gamble with Western apathy. Most can't afford the cost. Terrorism offers a high-leverage, low-cost, low-risk alternative to direct confrontation, one that has a proven track record of success. The problem is that the United States, in my view, despite all that has been said by the administration, is ill-prepared to deal with this level of threat, and public concern fades quickly. Even now, the shock of the World Trade Center bombing is fading from attention. The story is going to the back pages. Our mood swing goes from apathy to paranoia to apathy. One thing that just nobody has addressed at all, and to get to my past association with FEMA, we need to have some ability to cope with disasters after they've occurred, major ones. It would take 4 terrorists to take New York City offline, electricity, for months. We need to be able to cope with the consequences of major terrorist acts as well as reducing their vulnerability. Instead of being concerned only about making arrests and doing intelligence investigations, I think that we have got to be able to pay attention to vulnerable targets and to harden them in sensible ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Livingstone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I find it ironic to be here today since I was in Belfast on the day that the World Trade Center was hit, forced to return to my own country to deal with a problem that we once thought unthinkable here. I've submitted a statement for the record reviewing many of the things that have already been reviewed today, but I would like to say that there are some policy recommendations that I think can be made. And I raise these with the experience of having met for 15 years with the victims of terrorism and their families, and to suggest that we have a very poor track record of bringing people to justice. You've already gone over things like improved border security and the introduction of taggants into explosive material, things that we've been recommending for the better part of 2 decades right now. But I'd also like to talk, our first line of defense against terrorism is indeed better intelligence. And at a time that we are talking about drastic reductions in the intelligence budget, about some members of Congress have even called for the complete disbandment of the Central Intelligence Agency, I think we ought to be looking toward reorganization of our intelligence capabilities to better direct them toward the current threats that we have today. We need a better system to coerce, if necessary, improved international cooperation. You know, without extradition, the system doesn't work. We're left with having to resort to force or do nothing. And the fact is that even our very best allies, like Germany and Italy and so on, have not extradited to us. Germany didn't extradite Mohammed Hamidi, the brutal terrorist aboard TWA-847 who beat a young Navy diver within an inch of his life and then killed him and dumped his body out on the tarmac. So what I'm suggesting to you today is that we ought to look toward the remedies that we have to lean on our allies a bit more, to get extradition so that the international system works. And one way of doing that may be to deny them the benefits of normal commerce and relations with the United States. Certainly we can look at abridgments of the most favored nation and other things that we do between allies who share common destinies and share common interests. Like Bob Kupperman, I agree that we need to do more with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. But there are problems right here at home that we can legislatively address. Mayhem manuals. I provided this committee at the Council's request with 8 publications that detail how to make improvised explosives. They have titles like Kitchen Improvised Plastic Explosives, Kitchen Improvised Blasting Caps, Improvised Munitions Black Book, Improvised Shaped Charges, Kitchen Improvised Fertilizer Explosives, and so on. I have 1,600 titles of literature like this, along with blueprints on how to carry out racist and anti-Semitic attacks in this country. Most of this literature has been generated by far-right groups, a little bit of it by far-left groups. But the fact is that even an 8-year-old child can buy this kind of literature through the mail for $8.95 or less in cash. I've tried it. I've sent through the mail a yellow, you know, that stationery that children use with the dotted line in the center. I wrote the order in crayon, and I sent cash, and I got 3 bomb-making manuals through the mail. I don't think that many Americans would regard this as a major abridgment of their First Amendment rights if we tried to put restrictions similar to the restrictions that we put on pornography on this kind of literature, if only to children. Perhaps we can find other ways to limit it. But only in America could you do as I did and buy a bomb-making manual out at National Airport in the bookstore at National Airport where I bought the Anarchist Cookbook, only in America. Finally, I would say to you that we must consider the fact that only one terrorist of international consequence has been brought to trial to date in the United States through our jurisprudence process. And that was in a demonstration of the extraterritorial power of the United States where Fawaz Yunus, a small fry if there ever was one, the accused hijacker of a Jordanian jetliner, was grabbed by the FBI after being lured onto a yacht in the Eastern Mediterranean and brought back to the United States. It probably cost the taxpayer something between $15 and $30 million to convict this guy of 4 of the 7 counts. We don't have a very good track record because we can't get a hold of people, and it goes back to the extradition question. And so I would respectfully submit to you, as controversial as it might be, that we need to look at this issue of extraterritorial apprehension once again. We're not going to find another terrorist as dumb as Fawaz Yunus to take an invitation to a party on a yacht from people he didn't know in the Eastern Mediterranean and allow us to arrest him. We're going to have to return, perhaps, or at least discuss the possibility of requiring or viewing some parts of the world as essentially pirate enclaves, as we did in the past. And if they will not cooperate with the international system in extradition and in preventing terrorist attacks being launched from their territory, we must consider, or at least we must talk about the consideration of extending extraterritorial apprehension to the territory of these very special cases, not to Mexico, not to Canada, not to the territory of our allies, but to these very special cases. And with that, I thank the committee for its time and indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Livingstone. And I have a bunch of questions, so normally if it was like this, we try to rush it. We have to vote. But I'll delay my questions if there are a couple of questions maybe that any of my colleagues have, so they don't have to come back. I am going to come back, and they're welcome to join me and ask more extensive questions. But if they wish to ask a question now, we have about 3-4 minutes before we'd have to walk over and forego their having to come back. And Mr. Edwards?
We've been dealing with what Mr. Livingstone called extraterritorial extradition. Apprehension, which means another word for kidnapping. Is that correct?
No, it doesn't mean kidnapping, sir. I think the Justice Department has differing views on this. There was a memo that was written under the Carter administration that said that the Constitution and our various laws and statutes would not permit this. There was a subsequent memorandum addressed under the previous administration that said indeed in special circumstances that we could, if we cannot get redress any other way, we should consider, and at least they believe that we have the right to reach out and bring people back here, the same way we do with our bail system, if you will, with someone that jumps bail in a particular state.
Well, the Attorney General released information about that executive order that you refer to and the memorandum by the Office of Legal Counsel, and I think that every country in the world that we have relations with protested that it was a license to interfere and to enter their country surreptitiously, which which if we did that, they could do the same to us. That would mean that Saddam Hussein could claim the same extraterritorial rights. Isn't that true?
I'm aware of the concerns, and as I said, I raised it today in the issue of putting issues that I think need to be further discussed on the table. But I would say to you that when governments cannot police their own shores or their own territory, as in the case of Lebanon during much of the 1980s and part of the 1970s, that I think those are special cases. I think similarly that we might indeed be able to identify a small number of bad actors. I would have my own list of those countries, but that are habitual offenders who have been involved in the killing of American citizens, who will not extradite, who are providing state support, and to say that they have violated their rights to any kinds of protections that the international system would normally provide. But I'm not suggesting this be used promiscuously, even under the worst of circumstances, sir.
I'm sure you're not, and thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to take a brief, we have to apologize to our witnesses. We have to go vote. We're going to take a brief recess. Hopefully we'll start up at 2:10. I think that'll give everybody enough time to vote and come back. Okay, we're briefly recessed. To the witnesses, I thought there was only one vote, but there were two, so it held us up doubly. I guess Mr. Edwards had finished his question, so why don't we go to you, Mr. Mazzoli?
The gentleman from Texas, because I wasn't here for the statements, and I think I'll try to get caught up.
Go ahead, Mr. Washington. And if you want, I'll go, but feel free. Go right ahead. You were next.
You were present. All three of you gentlemen were present, and heard the line of questions. And forgive me, but I'm not an expert in anything near what you all three of you gentlemen are expert in. And so my questions may seem a little rudimentary, but I'm trying to lay some foundational groundwork for where I need to be intellectually to try to get over to what I understand, and I've read your prepared testimony, all three of you, and I understand. I've listened carefully to what you said here, the thrust of the varying views, but the common nexus on where we are as a country and how easy or difficult it may be to have another situation like this. My question goes to, is there, first of all, is there money usually associated? I mean, not so much from the motive point of view, but wouldn't it take a good deal of money to amass this amount of explosives, whether it's dynamite or C4 or anything else like that, or is it relatively inexpensive?
No, it's inexpensive. It's inexpensive.
Inexpensive.
Yes, inexpensive. We're not talking about huge quantities of money to either make explosives out of commercially available material or to acquire commercial explosives.
And I heard Dr. Kupperman mention in relation to some of the components that you could go to Radio Shack and get some of the stuff.
Yes, some of the timing mechanisms, to set off the explosive, if it's a crude explosive, to set it off efficiently, you need a great deal of it, and you have to use electronic timers.
Right. And I operate from the assumption that anything remotely related to motive in a situation like this would obviously have to be in a larger context. It was not, I'm just assuming, and I'm asking for your opinion, it was obviously not directed by some disgruntled former employee who was mad at the management that owned or operated the World Trade Center, and that wouldn't be the motive. So it seems to me that whomever individual or groups of individuals committed this atrocity was trying to get some sort of message across.
Yeah, one message might be were the FBI not successful in having captured somebody quickly, and particularly if that individual was really indeed shown to be part of the conspiracy, One message might be that the U.S. is impotent